Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. That brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion under its Blu-ray release at spine number 1175. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 2006. And the name of the filmmaker is David Lynch. And the name of the film is Inland Empire. This is the work from the year 2006, and it is from the artist, the filmmaker, the director, the writer, the truly one-of-a-kind cinematic figure extraordinaire that is, of course, the one, the only David Lynch. And here we have a work which is credited as written and directed by David Lynch. And many other aspects of the making of this film fall to his own direction as well. Produced by Mary Sweeney, and among the co-producers, we understand, is credited none other than the great Laura Dern. And Laura Dern is very significant in the context of this work because, among other things, she heads this cast of performers and actors who appear in this work. So Laura Dern is among the great Lynchian cast that is assembled. And let me just say that Laura Dern and others appear. And I don't want to mention who else appears because that's part of the fun, that's part of the mystery and surprise and true breathtaking Lynchian joie de vivre, in a manner of speaking, when one is watching this film, especially for the first time. So let me just say that Laura Dern appears in this film as well as others. And I'm, of course, speaking about this one-of-a-kind work. And I'm so happy that it has found its way at last to the physical media collection or the catalog of the Criterion Collection. Of course, I'm speaking of Inland Empire. Inland Empire is now in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog on this occasion of 2023, and we have this 2-disc Blu-ray release, which is on the table right here. And I will talk a little bit more about what we can find in terms of the supplements and the restoration details and my reactions and responses to those aspects of this really great Criterion release in a number of respects. But before I do, let me first try, if I may, endeavor, if I may, to explain or talk about or relive in my heart and my mind and my soul what this work is about. And I think if we were to try to approach this work in terms of the plot or structure, story structure, or structures, or plots, or strands, or avenues of, say, scenario and suggestion, which I think is part of the complex labyrinth that is Inland Empire. I think if we were to try to tackle it, I think one can go in many possible directions. One place might be the tagline, and such tagline is very, I think, nicely featured on this Criterion cover art, which is "A Woman in Trouble." And I think that says volumes in terms of how one might approach the various plot lines or subplots or, say, episodes that we may encounter as we watch Inland Empire unfold before our very eyes and ears. Because we see or encounter a number of people, a number of figures who may or may not be related to each other, both in terms of time and space and, say, emotional proximity. They may or may not know each other. They may or may not be one and the same person, or they may be reflections of completely different fragmented personalities, or they may be separate entities in and of themselves, or they may be external, perhaps extraterrestrial, or perhaps they are more internalized and more, say, introspective than meets the eye. But regardless of how one might, say, focus on one interpretation or the other, I think we can say that there is a lot of stuff, and there are a lot of figures that we see, and there are a lot of rooms, and there are a lot of geographical spaces that we can begin to try as we get ourselves immersed into this world, or these worlds, and get ourselves, say, ourselves soaked in the atmosphere that is David Lynch's Inland Empire. I think we can begin to try to maybe think about possible ways of experiencing this or feeling this, maybe in a type of concrete, interpretive way, or maybe in a more non-concrete, amorphous way. Or maybe a combination of the two, or maybe a completely different approach, depending on your subjective tastes and needs and your own experiences as a cinema viewer. Viewer of David Lynch. And so this is my roundabout way of trying to suggest at the outset that I think this is a film that can be subject to many different forms of reading, many different feelings and approaches and a type of immersion, if you will, which can lead you to many different possibilities as to what you think this film is about and how you, therefore, as a viewer, can engage with this film. And so I think in that way, there is so much excitement, there's so much life and electricity that is in the air that we can feel. I certainly can feel when I watch this film every single time I see it. Now, amongst all that, and perhaps as part of the grammar of Inland Empire, or as part of the cinematic language that is seemingly being employed as we traverse this very luxurious and mysterious and quite puzzling terrain that is Inland Empire, I think we can begin to identify certain moments or certain points that we could say have a sense of accessibility or maybe an immediacy, things that you might interpret directly as signifying something, such as the places, Hollywood or the world of filmmaking, studio settings and making movies. This is part of the one strand that is, I think, established. And here we have Laura Dern's character, or a performance by Laura Dern, let's put it that way, where she seems to be engaged in this world of movie making, and the behind the scenes, say, intrigue or detail about casting, about living in this world, about sort of the private lives of actors, and the means by which they will try to get roles, and meeting the artists and directors, and being on set and meeting the other actors, and how this may slowly but surely begin to set the stage for a number of, say, Lynchian facets, such as the establishment of, say, a double or triple or quadruple or even further multiplied sensibilities and identities. Because, of course, we have the idea of the metaphor of acting via, the idea of acting serving as a metaphor for playing roles, and how that is maybe exponentially explored, not just in terms of, say, the world of movie making, but perhaps also in the inner terrain of the characters that we meet. And I say characters with an S plural, because even when we have a seemingly one character at the very heart of the proceedings, maybe we can begin to understand that many different figures that we meet might be different roles of the same person, or might be different, say, embodiments or different visions, or maybe even different existences, alternate realities of the singular same plane of subjective viewpoint, namely variations on a theme, or variations on a person, or variations on a character. And if we can translate that in the world of movie making, I think that parallel of playing a role or adopting a role in the context of making a film on a studio stage or sound stage, then suddenly transforming into different roles or different stories that seem to be unfolding at a very hurried and quite frenzied pace, and suddenly out of nowhere we are knocked off our senses and transported into something that's seemingly different or seemingly foreign or seemingly out of the ordinary. Now that, I think, has many implications, both in terms of the application of the metaphor of filmmaking, but also we can take that as a parallel route, or perhaps as an augmented route, or perhaps as a totally different route altogether, as to the nature of perception, nature of how we see ourselves, how we envision ourselves. Maybe we envision ourselves in ways that we look and feel and sound like different people. Maybe these different people are one and the same. Maybe the many stories that we are seeing, are they connected or aren't they connected? Maybe we can look at this not as a world of possible connections, but maybe as a world of total disconnect, which is another very exciting and indeed potentially frightening and frightening reading indeed. If we were to think about the implications of a world bereft of connection, namely a world of disconnect, and the type of, say, cynicism that I think that might suggest. That is certainly possible in the case of a reading of Inland Empire. Various scenarios are presented before our very eyes, and in this way, we as viewers perhaps can be given the option, the choice to interpret and intuit and feel and have a sensibility as to maybe we might feel the desire or interpretive urge to want to establish connections, which I think is a very reasonable way of looking at this. And I subscribe to that sensibility quite often when I rewatch this film. But there are other times when I can look at the various, say, situations that unfold before my very eyes, and I can look at it in a completely disconnected way. And when I look at it in that completely disconnected way, there is still a type of magic that occurs in my subjective viewing experience of this film, but it feels like a very it has a different reaction and has a different conclusion than, say, other readings of this film that I might subject myself to as I watch this film on different occasions. So there is so much in terms of a danger. There's so much in terms of threats and life and death and realization and betrayal and connections and say impulses and wit and humor and charm and confusion, utter sublime confusion. That is all part of the proceedings here. And again, with these various, say, identifiable, say, trappings of setting or identifiable grains of say, maybe a cinematic grammar, like the Hollywood soundstage, like the movie within the movie, like the actors trying to get a role that then translates into other scenes, such as scenes on the street at night, or maybe interrogation scenes, or maybe scenes involving sudden bursts of violence, or maybe domestic quarrels, quarrels between couples, or maybe situations involving say, lighting and figures that are off camera, or maybe borrowing money, or meeting mysterious neighbors, or having to deal with television appearances, or mysterious, darkened, maybe dimly lit hallways, or rooms with a singular, say, lamp that provides a very weakened light from the corner of the room that may or may not be hiding something sinister beneath the shadows, or behind the corner, something at the very end of the hallway. What that sinister thing is left up to the imagination. And indeed, it might signify something, i.e. a woman in trouble, or indeed people in trouble, or indeed situations or individuals or people, places, and things that indeed are confronting trouble, or maybe the opposite. Maybe the things that we are meeting and the people that we are seeing and engaging with, maybe they are the source of the danger. Maybe they are the source of the confusion and the threat. And if we subscribe to certain interpretations, such as these external people are indeed internal representations of various facets of the internal, namely, if we can subscribe to the possible reading of this film that every person we meet is maybe a representation of the inner the subconscious workings of our main characters, then I think we can understand that therefore any external threat becomes internal, and any type of action or danger or trouble might be trouble that's stemming from within, or it might be also coming from an external force. And I think that's part of the great challenge of a work like Inland Empire. Now, I've tried to explain it in a way that is, I think, very generalized, because once again, I don't want to overstate the plot. For one thing, I think it's very difficult to overstate the plot in a very linear way, because it has so many plot threads that I think operate all at once in different, say, geographical locations, and even arguably maybe different dimensions, different forms of existence, sometimes not even human, perhaps. So that type of multi-planed existential smorgasbord is, I think, a part of a great appeal and allure of a work like Inland Empire, thus almost defying a type of linear narrative explanation. If anything, it's multi-linear, and that linearity, or the multi-linear nature, I think, almost pulls in opposite directions, thus causing a great deal of wonderfully applied cinematic tension to the nth degree, or to the Lynchian degree. So in that way, it's very difficult for me, I think, to present a kind of quote-unquote traditional plot synopsis. But at the same time, I would say that I would prefer not to provide a traditional plot synopsis to this film. Just leave it in terms of the elements. With Laura Dern, her performance, or various aspects of her performances, let's put it that way, seemingly at the heart and center of the proceedings. Let me just put it there. Thus, the tagline, "A Woman in Trouble," the brevity of it, I think, is the genius of it, because it says so little and so much at the same time, which is, I think, the perfect way, the perfect application of approaching a work like Inland Empire for the first time. It's everything and nothing. It seems to be something that is saying so much, but then it seems to be going in places where it is both defying interpretation but also asking for it. And it's that, I think, wonderful push and pull, that wonderful sense of unease and tension that creates, in me anyway, when I watch the film subjectively, a real a thrilling, almost like roller coaster ride of utter perplexed feeling, utterly lost at sea, feeling completely bewildered, totally bewildered at times, but wanting to try to connect the dots. And maybe my way of connecting the dots is the right, quote-unquote, right way, but quote-unquote wrong way. And I use air quotes because, in fact, there is no right way and there is no wrong way. We can therefore connect the dots in any way I think we see fit, or perhaps we don't need to connect the dots. We can leave the dots unconnected, which I think is, as I was trying to mention before, a very viable and quite exciting, and indeed perhaps disturbing and frightening way of interpreting this film. But its brilliance lies in its labyrinthine approach, and that labyrinthine approach and structure invites many possibilities, almost ad infinitum. So that is Inland Empire in terms of a plot or story structure in a nutshell, I think. A Woman in Trouble, starring Laura Dern and others, directed by David Lynch. Inland Empire. Ta-da! So I think, let me now try to then express some more personal comments about it, and then we'll get into a discussion about what this great Criterion release has to offer here. So before we get into more details about the Criterion release and what the Criterion release has to offer, which is really great, by the way, let me just embellish some of my earlier comments with some more personal details, if that's okay. And so with that, I can say that when this film was first released in 2006, I was so fortunate to have been able to watch this in the theater a number of times. I was living in New York City at the time, and the movie theater was the IFC Theater. I think I got that right, in downtown New York. And I was living not so far away at the time. I could walk. It was a pretty walkable distance. So I had the great fortune of being able to get tickets and go watch Inland Empire. And so I watched it in this fairly packed theater. And it was such a great experience. So much so that I went and watched it a number of times, in fact, during that initial run. And every time the theater was packed, it was a healthy crowd, healthy in terms of the audience, the amount of people that were there, and everyone was in it, and everyone was really into the film. And I remember some of the moments too. I don't want to go into too much detail for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great film, Inland Empire. But let me just say that there were some moments that the audience really reacted, and me too, just reacted. There's that oft-used cliche, it's just like jumping out of one's seat, that kind of thing. But it really happened. People were just almost thrilled out of their seats in many respects and many scenes here. And so that has gone down as being one of the most memorable movie-going experiences. I've cherished that moment in time ever since. So it was 2006, and so that's nearly 20 years ago, and that is quite mind-boggling to me now that I think about that in terms of years, because it feels like yesterday that I went to that New York movie theater to see Inland Empire. Again, on a number of occasions, and every time I was thrilled, and there were moments where I was just totally lost. What is going on? What am I watching? And there were other moments when I was reveling in being totally lost. And there are other moments when I thought I got it. I thought I was watching, oh yes, that's what that means. But then I was totally pushed off of my pedestal of interpretive comfort, and I was suddenly lost again, and not knowing where I was, trying desperately as I was watching the film to try to put the puzzle pieces together. But then maybe upon my nth viewing of the film, I began to maybe realize, or make the realization to myself anyway, again based on my own subjective David Lynch cinema journey, that maybe for me the point is not trying to put the puzzle pieces together in a type of linear narrative fashion, but rather just letting the film fall over me, or letting my cells, letting the film be absorbed into my pores, and let it sink in, soak in, and let me bask in the brilliant, perplexing, confusing glory that is David Lynch's Inland Empire, and let's see what happens at the end of the road there. And so it's a very baffling and quite a unique experience in that way, and I loved every moment of it. And in that way too, it became so great because every time I see it, it treats me to it challenges me to a different reading or approach. I mean, it's that complex, and there are so many moving pieces going on, so many scenarios, and we'll get into a little bit of this when we talk about the supplements in terms of how this was initially envisioned, and what was the genesis, what was the kernel of the idea in terms of how this was structured, and how David Lynch started to put this together in terms of the script, or or what came first, the idea or the script? I mean, it's one of those things. What came first, the chicken or the egg? And if you ask that question in the context of a David Lynch film, you're in for one heck of an answer indeed. And so we'll save a little bit of those details for when we get to a discussion of the supplements here. But suffice to say that part of the fun and joy of this is the challenge of the creative juices that are obviously on display when one is observing and watching and experiencing Inland Empire, to the point of utter bewilderment. And to be taken into this realm of utter bewilderment is not only enchanting, but also invigorating, and it has a sense of giving us, the viewers, the opportunity to inject something of ourselves, or something of, maybe not necessarily always ourselves, but something of our understanding of what we think is happening, based on, say, our own experiences, or based on, say, our own approaches to cinema, or viewing or experiencing art, or maybe our own subjective life experiences and the like. Therefore, it is possible, as an example, to see a number of the scenes of Inland Empire and see them as being, say, domestic quarrels between couples, or people that are intimate with each other. And that's a very, I think, identifiable and understandable thing. And having fights with people that you know, I mean, this is, I think, a very understandable thing. So that's one way to access the world of Inland Empire, is to find things that are relatable to everyday life. And then when you enter into the world through those relatable things or objects or ideas, then you're totally succumb to the whole world of David Lynch and company. So finding those relatable or identifiable items, I think, is one of the great joys and challenges of watching a film like Inland Empire. So the idea too of wanting to land a new job, or the idea of meeting new people, or meeting your neighbors, or being asked to lend someone money, or talking to strangers on a street sidewalk or bus stop, or maybe just being in a house and then suddenly being scared because you're alone, or you think you're alone, and the lights are flickering, and the hallway down the way there is suddenly dark and ominous, etc. So, who hasn't felt that experience before? I certainly have, a number of occasions, and that's another great exciting thing too. Watching a film like Inland Empire, there's so much of the elemental and there's so much of the fundamental, and I think that's one of the great genius aspects of works by David Lynch, is that it takes the elements, the fundamental building blocks of, say, cinema and life, and really transforms them in a way that is so relatable on the one hand, and so mysterious and vexing, and quite inscrutable on the other. Take this idea of a hallway in Inland Empire. This idea of walking down a dark, shadowed hallway, not knowing what's on the other end, not knowing what's in the room behind the door that's closed. This is a very elemental feeling of fear. And that feeling, that elemental nature, I think almost harkens back to a sense of maybe subconsciously reminding us of fears that we might have had in childhood. That's one way of looking at scenes like this in Inland Empire, and indeed other very challenging and thought-provoking scenes in the filmography of David Lynch. This idea of things that are maybe triggering or reminding us or inciting a type of, say, fear or feeling of acknowledgement that it can be traced all the way back to our innermost, say, childhood fears. And those childhood fears never leave us. They always stay with us. However, they become translated in the scope of our lives as we grow into adults. But whatever the case may be, that type of triggering or reminding of something that's deep down but beneath the surface in our innermost selves, expressed in this very sometimes elaborate, oftentimes almost absurd way in the hands of David Lynch and company, in terms of the Lynchian cinema. That is one of the great magical points of watching a work like Inland Empire, seeing how seemingly nonsensical ideas give way or give rise to reminding us of the truly elemental and frightening, and things that are tucked away deep within our subconscious. So that is one of the great exciting things of watching a film like Inland Empire, because there's so many of those moments things like, I don't know, like even things like fears, just maybe an innate fear of clowns or something like that, or the idea of watching a TV alone in a room at night. There's something very happy and free. There's also something very melancholy and sad about that. And that type of yearning or longing for something that is there but not there, something that is inciting or eliciting certain sense of dreams and ambition, but also ephemeral and untouchable, because it's like static electricity on a TV screen or something to that effect. So that, I think, those are examples of where a work like Inland Empire really uses the elements, uses the fundamental building blocks of, say, psychology, in a way that really provokes and elicits and creates rumors and reactions, and sometimes those reactions are very extreme and intense indeed. And that's, again, part of the great fun and challenge and a raw cinematic movie-going experience that is watching a David Lynch work, and that is watching a film like Inland Empire. So, and you get so many of those moments and then some when watching this, and imagine watching that in the theater. My goodness, that was a real, almost roller coaster ride indeed. And not to say that things are nonsensical all the way through. I mean, there are moments when you take them in the sort of minute, or take them in the micro. There are moments within the scope of, say, that particular segment of the film Inland Empire where it does make sense within the framing of that, say, universe, or the micro-universe. Because there are many, one can say, many different micro-universes that are embodied within the work Inland Empire. And when you look at it as a whole, it might not seem to be, at first glance, to be things that are easily connectable. But when you look at the micro, everything that's within the realm of the micro, I think, makes sense within the world of the micro. And so I think we get a lot of that here within Inland Empire, all the micro-universes that may or may not be connected. Another way to say that is all the dots that may or may not be connectable. And that's another thing, too, that I want to say. I've mentioned in the context of other Lynch-related works, discussions that I've had on this channel, but let me say here again, especially in the context of Inland Empire, or as a great example in the context of Inland Empire, what Lynch does so well, David Lynch does so well, is that he is able to take this idea of connection and disconnection, connect or disconnect. And these ideas, I think, can be fundamentally polar opposites. There are connections or disconnections. And that is the source of dread and absurdity in the hands of Lynch. And oftentimes that gives way to comedy, the Lynchian style, the absurdist comedy, which I think is often associated with David Lynch works. But I think it's fundamentally, or one of the ways to read that is the idea of disconnect. Because if you have two characters in the same room within the same scene, you get a lot of that in Inland Empire. Interrogation scenes, one character is talking, another character is listening, or seemingly listening. You have this idea that maybe the setting, or the cinematic visual grammar that we are presented with as viewers of the film, two people sitting across from an interrogation table in a room that looks like, I don't know, maybe a police station or something, an interrogation. So that has the visual, say, cues or grammatical cues to indicate to us that we might therefore understand that these two characters are connecting. One is talking, the other is listening. Therefore, a connection could be said to be made. However, in the hands of David Lynch, those scenes, again, without going into too much detail for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this film, Inland Empire, one can say that when you have scenes like this, even if two people are in the same room, that does not always mean that they are connecting. They might be on totally different planes. And when one person is talking from one plane of existence, talking to another person who is on a different plane of existence, the lines of dialogue from one person to the other will not fit. They won't match. And the opposite is true. What the other person says to the first person is going to be coming from a different plane of existence. And so when you have two lines of dialogue, or two characters that are approaching each other from different planes of existence, therein lies the absurdity. Therein lies the comedy. Therein, dare I say it, lies the disconnect. And that is that is ultimately one of the ways in which I see David Lynch works, especially Inland Empire. It's a world of disconnect. It's a world of people and places and things that seemingly are not at all connected with each other. And if you subscribe to that reading throughout Inland Empire, which I think is a very possible reading, not only are you left with the possibility of feeling a sense of absurdity, but also feeling a sense of dread, because without connection, you're left with a lost connection. And that idea of loss, not knowing where to go next, that can be a potentially funny thing, and funny ha-ha in a way that one is feeling uncomfortable. And how does one confront that feeling of discomfort? One laughs. And that, I think, becomes part of the chain reaction of the Lynchian mode of, say, experiencing a Lynch film like Inland Empire, this idea of experiencing the film or interpreting the film as a series of disconnections. And I think if that's the case, the idea of nothing exists between the characters, this idea of everything or nothing, it's the ultimate donut hole. You can't have the donut without the hole. You can't have existence without non-existence. So the idea here is you cannot have, or in order to have a type of say, Lynchian magic, the idea is to mobilize and perhaps even embellish or emphasize the nothingness that exists between people, the disconnect. And that leads to absurdity, that leads to dread, that leads to frightening potential all around. And that way, a film like Inland Empire, if you look at it as a series of disconnections, it is a frightening world. It is indeed a horror film in many respects, and, as well as a film that is utterly Lynchian, absurd to the max in a great, brilliant way. And so that's one way of looking at it. But the other side of the coin is always possible in the world of David Lynch, especially in the world of Inland Empire, and that is connection. What is the opposite of disconnection? Connection. And so one of the magical things that one can see, at least possibly, in the world of David Lynch, such as one's approach to Inland Empire, is in the face of disconnect. Is it possible to see two characters that are seemingly on totally different planes of existence? Is it possible, despite that difference of plane existence, is it possible thus to see those characters connect despite their difference, despite the gulf that exists between them? And if we can interpret certain aspects of Inland Empire to suggest that maybe, yes, indeed, this concept of connection is possible, this concept of, say, empathy or sympathy, or maybe physical connection, or maybe a true understanding of something outside of oneself. If this is indeed possible in the world of David Lynch, Inland Empire, and others, but say Inland Empire because that's the immediate example here from the Criterion collection, if this is indeed impossible in the way that we as viewers subjectively read scenarios and scenes of Inland Empire or read the film writ large, and I think that also becomes a truly Lynchian magical moment indeed. This magic moment indeed, it's a moment that really is very much, it turns it into a sublime, transcendental experience, potentially anyway. And so it's that idea of ultimate opposites attract, everything and nothingness, existence and non-existence, and all stemming from the same kernel of, say, truth or feeling or ideal or experience, love, perhaps. Right? As this, to paraphrase a phrase, as the song saying goes in the song, strange what love does. And so, strange what love does indeed. It might pull us in a direction of optimism. It might pull us into a direction of cynicism. It might therefore suggest a type of everything. It might suggest a type of nothing. It might suggest a state of being and existence. It might suggest a state of nothingness and non-existence. Everything and nothing. Connection or disconnection. The possibilities are indeed endless and infinite. Strange what love does indeed in the world of Inland Empire and in the hands of David Lynch. And so this is, once again, my, I'm so sorry, very roundabout, bloated way of trying to express just how packed, chock full of stuff how much of a Lynchian smorgasbord this film is, Inland Empire. It is challenging. It is very challenging. It is a film that I don't think, I think it benefits from as many watches as possible. I think it's a film that it can be very baffling indeed, very frustrating perhaps for people who might be expecting a certain type of film. It is very much a Lynchian film. It can be said to be very unique in the context of Lynch's filmography. But I'll try to explain a little bit more when we get into the supplements about how I feel about how it figures into the Lynch filmography, especially in the context of a work like Eraserhead. I'll get into that because it does. There's a great comment that's made in one of the supplements about how this seems to be going in a certain direction that was identified in terms of Lynch's work a la Eraserhead. But we'll get to that later. But it is, again, has the potential for being very baffling and very WTF. This is, in many ways, the ultimate WTF film. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if anything, I think Inland Empire as a WTF film is one of the great WTF films ever. And one of the great things about WTF films is, the more you watch a WTF film, the more you feel WTF'd. And I don't know about you, but as a cinematic experience, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling WTF'd. On the contrary, I think having that experience and feeling and emotion and yearning and longing and desire and emotional state of being being utterly WTF'd by a film, I think is not just baffling and not just challenging and perplexing, but also very, very rewarding and very satisfying as a cinematic viewing experience, especially when we have the opportunity of watching the film time and time and time and time and time again. And when a film like Inland Empire, regardless of how many times you watch it, refuses to yield its answers easily, then I think you are in for a very powerful and magical and unforgettable thrill ride that can lead to, again, the possibilities are infinite in terms of how one can read Inland Empire. But that's the great strength of this film. That is the real great strength of this film. It is a film that is about everything and nothing, and it is a film that is about existence and non-existence. It's a film about connection and non-connection, and is everything in between. If that's the case, then it is truly a film that is, it seems to transcend into the infinite, as well as leave one feeling totally confused. Again, WTF'd to the max. And I love it. This is the work which is by David Lynch, which is Inland Empire. The Criterion Collection has released this work, Inland Empire, on this new Blu-ray edition at SPY number 1175. And it is a 2-disc Blu-ray set. And I'm opening up the plastic case here. And so just to let you know that the discs look like this. They're stacked in this plastic case compartment with the booklet that would going on this side of the interior of the plastic casing. I have already removed the booklet for purposes of today's video discussion, and I'll talk a little bit more about the booklet and its contents and goodies a little bit later on. But just to let you know, this is a 2-disc Blu-ray set. The first disc has the work itself, and then the second disc has a whole bunch of supplements. So let us talk first about the presentation as it's described in the booklet, the basis for which Criterion is making this release. So on page 27 of this very great, stapled, robust booklet, it does say about the restoration, and I quote, "Inland Empire was shot in SD 4x3 480i 29.97 on DV tape. After being captured, the footage was edited in the same format in Avid. The footage was then converted to HD 16:9, 1080p 23.98, and input into Clipster for remote DaVinci 2K grading. During this process, a Teranex converter was used to treat video noise on selected shots. With the digital intermediate DI master complete, it was output to 35mm film and HD Cam SR tape. In 2021, the HDCam SR source was recaptured and upscaled to UHD 4K 16:9 via numerous algorithms in Topaz Labs' Gigapixel AI software. Those tests were compared against the original HD Video Master as well as a 4K scan of the first reel of the 35mm digital negative. From these tests, director David Lynch chose the upscale made using the Gaia HD algorithm and footage that had first been downscaled back to SD in order to throw away false detail introduced during the original HD conversion and allow the most effective use of the AI upscale. Footage upscaled directly from the HD was less noticeably, quote, 4K looking, end quote. After the entire movie had been processed, it underwent quality control for image-breaking artifacts, such as faces becoming garbled. Several shots were flagged and then redone using the next best gigapixel setting. Once the upscale was complete, the 4K image was brought into DaVinci Resolve for a new color pass to manage color balance and saturation, as well as add a slight layer of grain. This 4K remaster was used as the source for the HD presentation on this Blu-ray. The audio presented for this release was remastered in January 2022 by the film's original re-recording mixers, Lynch, Dean Hurley, and Ron Eng, working from the original 5.1 mix stems. Careful scene-by-scene adjustments involving noise reduction, dialogue levels, and overall dynamics decisions were made under Lynch's supervision. This new mix preserves the overall color and channel assignment of the original mix, which by design maintained a, quote, front-heavy, quote, delivery of the mix's energy with intentionally minimal surround activity, end quote. And once again, this is taken from page 27 of the booklet, and I've read it out in its entirety here. And please go ahead and read it to your heart's content if you have the actual Blu-ray copy here from Criterion. This is actually a very fascinating read. I must admit that I don't necessarily have the intellectual capacity to understand the technical details surrounding this very interesting description of the video and audio, or the video presentation and audio presentation. But I do get a general sense as to the amount of work that seems to have been involved in presenting this presentation for purposes of this Criterion release. Again, it's described as being a new HD digital master made from the 4K restoration supervised by director David Lynch, with 5.1 DTS HD master audio and uncompressed stereo soundtracks, newly remastered by Lynch, and original re-recording mixers Dean Hurley and Ron Eng, as it was also described on such page of the booklet, which I've just read out loud. So, again, I seen this work in the theater when it was initially released, and I have seen this film on a number of occasions with a number of separate releases prior to the Criterion release. For example, I have the 2-disc DVD that was released some time back, which is right here, and we'll also take refer back to this when we talk a little bit about the supplements here. I also have a Japanese Blu-ray, which is right here. So, while I have, generally speaking, relied on, for example, the earlier DVD, which is great, by the way, Absurda DVD. Really, really love this. This is one of my favorite items in my collection, and I've always relied upon this primarily when I've watched Inland Empire. And I understand that from a kind of subjective viewpoint, it does have a video quality, grainy look to it. Inland Empire does, and it has a type of hum or type of a tinny sound, for lack of a better phrase. And I mean that again positively when I consider the soundtrack and the soundtrack's effect. There's a type of haunting, hollow echo, or hum, or a type of electricity buzz, for lack of a better phrase, that seems to be very haunting and muted, but it still seems to be present there, and that adds to, I think, a type of ethereal, or maybe a full-bodied sense of kind of purposely applied emptiness, which I think is very much part of how one can view and listen and absorb the world and feelings and ideas that are presented in Inland Empire. And you have this, again, this very, I think, purposely applied digital video look, which I think has a very purposeful style and applied technique to it that I think makes for very compelling and challenging and quite absorbing watches indeed. Now, once again, I can rely on my memories of those movie theater going experiences from many years back of this work, Inland Empire, having enjoyed those thoroughly, oh so thoroughly. And so I can say with great confidence that I am totally taken with how this film now looks and sounds with this Criterion release. Once again, it is a film that I think, or it's a work that maybe it's not meant to look the sharpest in terms of the contrast between shapes and contours on the screen. There is meant, I think, to be a type of buzz or video haze to the work. And again, I don't mean that in any derogatory way. It is meant to have that type of filtered aspect to it. And I think it's preserved very finely and very acutely when I watch this. And so I'm very impressed with this. Again, when we're talking about a type of maybe restoration or restored transfer or a retransfer of this, I think, or I understand that it's not necessarily for the sake of trying to say, quote unquote, clean up the image, end quote, but perhaps rather to further give rise to or enhance or otherwise preserve the sense of that digital video haziness and dreamlike quality or nightmarish quality, which I think has both a type of almost again overly artificial feel to it, which I think is again purposefully applied. It feels too immediate, too real, which I think is very much one of the ways in which that video look can have a type of psychological effect, at least on me when I'm watching. And I think that's part of the point when watching work like Inland Empire. You know, it's meant to have a sense of heightened reality, or it's meant to have a sense of perhaps what we're seeing is not necessarily what is real. So the enhancement of the artificial, or the enhancement of the close immediacy of the subject matter. I think that the quality of video and the sound of the video and the dim and the hum, I think, is really enhanced when I watch this film or this work in this Criterion presentation. So I love this. I thought this was so thoroughly engaging and absorbing, and very much part of the sweep of how I felt when I watched this in the movie theater. And not to take anything away from how I saw the film in earlier iterations and earlier versions. I thought it was always great when I watched it in earlier versions. But for me, it seems like this is going to be the default way for me to watch this film, Inland Empire, going forward. I thought it was really, really great. Once again, this is, I think, a transfer or a treatment, a process that is not necessarily meant to go for what might be deemed to be a type of maybe one, say, traditional way of viewing this type of restoration transfer work, namely to quote unquote clean up the image. I mean, that's part of the process oftentimes when it comes to applying digital transfer restoration work, when it comes to many works of cinema. I think very appropriate and reasonable and quite a noble purpose indeed. With Inland Empire, my sense is that there's a purpose behind the quote unquote rough nature of how it looks and feels and sounds, and I think that's part of the point. And it's preserved and enhanced and protected and I think aligned so acutely and so finely, both in terms of look and sound when I watch this on the Criterion disc here. So I am thoroughly impressed, and I'm very, very happy with this. And again, I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again, this is going to be my default way of watching this work, Inland Empire, going forward. So bravo for being able to present this on this Blu-ray edition for 2023. I should say, too, maybe that there's nothing, I don't think, inherently wrong with having this quote-unquote on the Blu-ray format rather than, say, on the 4K UHD disc. because there is something of a quote-unquote, for lack of a better phrase, it's not necessarily a work that is relying upon, say, it has a certain technological reliance that I think suits the Blu-ray format very, very well, very nicely. And so, I know that other David Lynch works in the Criterion Collection have received, say, 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo treatment, say recently, like Mulholland Drive, for example. And I think that's a very appropriate observation to make if you have that. However, once again, a work like Inland Empire, I think, it's meant to have a type of the graininess and the quote-unquote rough quality to it. And again, I use that term very affectionately, and I use that term very with a great deal of reverence and respect to this work, because I think that's part of the appeal and the point and the charm of this and the reach of this film. And in that way, I think the DVD format or the Blu-ray format, I think, works perfectly. It works perfectly. And so in that way, I'm very, very happy and very impressed. And I'm very taken with this Criterion release for 2023 of Inland Empire. And so now let us talk about the supplements that can be found on this great Criterion release. Once again, the work can be found on Blu-ray disc number 1, and then on Blu-ray disc number 2 we'll have a whole bunch of supplements. Now, I should say that most of these supplements were found on previous releases, and I make reference to, for example, the earlier Absurda 2-disc DVD from some time back. I also refer to the Japanese Blu-ray, which is what I have here, and I'll again make note of that when we get to more discussions of the specifics of the supplements that could have been found on other previous releases. But before we get to those supplements, let me talk about a very special supplement that is new for purposes of this release. And this is the first supplement that's found on this Blu-ray disc 2. And this is a conversation between Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan. And this is described as being from the year 2022. It's approximately 31 minutes. And they are sitting in a room prepared, I think, by Criterion. They refer, I think, to Criterion directly. They talk. They've known each other for a long time. They've worked together, of course, having the David Lynch connection. And this is referred to at the very outset of their conversation. And you can just tell the love and admiration and appreciation in the room with the two of them together. It is so heartwarming and so full of that joie de vivre that is just so wonderful to see. This is the conversation between Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan, approximately 31 minutes. And what do they talk about? They speak about their meeting points, first getting involved with the world of David Lynch. Of course, Laura Dern reminds us about Kyle MacLachlan's work on Dune. And then, of course, Kyle MacLachlan reminds us, of course, about Laura Dern's work and his work, of course, on the film Blue Velvet. And here Laura Dern talks about the audition process with David Lynch and Bob's Big Boy. And also Kyle MacLachlan mentions Laura Dern and a very important work at that stage of her career, Smooth Talk, which is also a film that can be found in the Criterion Collection physical media catalog, by the way. It's a really compelling film. Here we are talking about, and Kyle MacLachlan then goes into a discussion where Laura Dern shares some anecdotes about the working process of this work, Inland Empire, and how she describes it as being a series of, say, ideas, or it was one idea that was shot or that was conceived of by Lynch, and the way in which this was then slowly worked together in a type of piecemeal fashion before a script was actually written is one of the great marvels of how this film was made. In other words, it came from a type of kernel of an idea that was then found a type of voice in something that David Lynch was trying to film or shoot with the DV camera equipment. And then from that idea came other ideas, and that type of patchwork or connecting the dots approach or philosophy is the sort of driving impulse that created the ultimate work that is Inland Empire. And so from there, so it's the idea of what came first, the chicken or the egg, what came first, the idea or the script. And so here Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern remind us that the ideas and the filming of certain ideas and the filming of certain scenes, and indeed those were what came first, and then a type of script or written process came afterwards. That's the notion behind the creation of Inland Empire. So it has a very dreamlike quality to it, I think, because of the way in which it was conceived. It has this type of conception by intuition, which I think is very a la David Lynch. And Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern really praise this and really, I think, attest to the way in which this gives a sense of freedom and input, and also a real a degree of direct input in terms of creativity. For example, Laura Dern describes certain scenes involving her makeup and her hair, and her hair has to look disheveled, and she has to look somewhat injured. Some injuries or indications of injuries need to be shown on her face, and she indicates that the makeup was done by none other than David Lynch himself. So we actually get a little scene of this a little bit later in some of the supplements, by the way. So it's really cool in terms of his really hands-on approach to the creative process. And so this idea of scene monologues and ideas that slowly grew and were connected with other scene monologues to create this sprawling epic that is Inland Empire. And so this has a... and from there, these kernels of ideas or monologues that were then maybe connected together in this intuitive way then led to the possibility of multiple roles or alternative takes on the same character, and this idea of a woman in trouble. And Kyle MacLachlan then and Laura Dern talk more about this approach in terms of Laura Dern's performance in Inland Empire, which is one of the great performances and the like. And then here we get Laura Dern's perspective and also Kyle MacLachlan. But Laura Dern talking in the context of Inland Empire, working with David Lynch, talking about an example where David Lynch was so intensely caught up about a bottle of water on the set, for example. He also talks about Steven Spielberg and talks about other things. And there's a great moment about in terms of how Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern approach and view Inland Empire, in terms of how David Lynch was making this work, in terms of this tying together these monologues that the genesis of these monologues or these scenes are then put together in this almost puzzle-like way. And Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern make the point about how it's almost like a type of quote-unquote return to form from the early days of David Lynch's career, a la Eraserhead, and working in a very tight-knit crew. If you know the work Eraserhead, you know that part of the legend of that film is the making of that film. It's a legendary story in and of itself, and so it's really great that Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan make that connection between Inland Empire and Eraserhead, because in fact it's indeed, I think, a very strong case to be made that Inland Empire is very much Eraserhead-like, or Eraserhead and Inland Empire, to my eyes, feel like kindred spirit films. They feel very much like hand in glove. And I mean that in terms of the look and feel and aesthetic. I also mean that in terms of the way in which there is a type of hybrid quality process in terms of genesis of scenes and the slow growth of scenes that grow and grow and grow and grow out of a kernel of an idea. Sometimes that growth can take days, weeks, months, maybe even years. But it does occur, and when it occurs, it becomes a beautiful, magical thing indeed. And also this type of patchwork quality, I think, leads to the immense sense of the depth of absurdity. I think, we have depths of absurdity throughout the context of David Lynch's filmography, but I think the depth of this absurdity, in my eyes, reaches, I think, such extreme and beautifully noble extreme bounds in works like Eraserhead and Inland Empire. And so to my eyes, they are kindred spirit films. And so to hear Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan speak of Inland Empire and the making of the film in this context, I think is so, it's cool. It is so cool indeed. So, and to hear them talk about, I mean, they make reference to other works by David Lynch, and I don't want to mention too much about those again, to sort of save the surprise for those who have yet to explore all of David Lynch's works. So, but suffice to say, they do speak a little bit about Blue Velvet. They do speak a little bit about other works. And they do speak a little bit about their own experiences working with David Lynch. And of course, Laura Dern here giving us the opportunity to hear more about her experiences with working with Lynch on this great work, Inland Empire. And what I love too is it does also remind us about one of the philosophical choices behind David Lynch's use of digital video. And Laura Dern describes it as being democratizing the film process. In other words, it was making the film process a lot less about the costs of filmmaking and the costs of the equipment, and really going down to quote unquote the basics, with equipment that was relatively speaking, not so cost prohibitive, thus democratizing the process. And so I think that type of thinking, I think, adds to the allure and sense of this film as being a very, I mean this in a very affectionate way, almost a DIY, do-it-yourself type of approach. And in that way, I think this work, Inland Empire, in this digital video format, which is praised by Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan here, in terms of the democratization of the process, as well as a type of harking back to the true depths of absurdity that we saw in early works like the short films of Lynch or Eraserhead, etc. So, and you get that sense, you feel the soul of that when you watch the work Inland Empire. At least I do. So that stuff is really, really great to hear the two of them talk about. So that is a great conversation between Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan from 2022, approximately 31 minutes. It's a great, one of the highlights of the year in terms of supplements. So please check it out if you can. And then continuing on with the supplements, we have Lynch 1. This is from 2007. This is kind of documentary or portrait, or a sort of look behind the curtain, as it were, by Black and White, focusing on the making of Inland Empire, that period of David Lynch's life and career. It's approximately 1 hour and 25 minutes. And what we get is a lot of these impressions and shots of David Lynch talking, sitting at his desk, talking about things like, there's a story about red ants. Again, I apologize for my very bad David Lynch impression, but he talks about red ants, or he talks about dreaming of Poland, or talking about meditation, and talking about Philadelphia, and photography, and sort of oceans of creativity in terms of meditation, and how that and other things really help to apply the type of creative drive and thrust that is the great world of David Lynch and his art. And so this is Lynch 1. What's so great about this is that for those who know the previous, say, Absurda DVD releases, my understanding is that Lynch 1, at least in the copy that I have here, was not ever included on this earlier Absurda DVD. It was, however, included in the Japanese Blu-ray. For those who know the Japanese Blu-ray, it came with this Japanese Blu-ray, had the 2 discs. It had the Blu-ray of Inland Empire, and then it had Lynch 1 on a separate DVD, excuse me. So that was the Japanese release. But it's really nice, therefore, to have this Criterion release have Lynch 1, a type of feature-length, loving portrait of David Lynch. It's much along the lines of Lynch 2, which is what we'll talk about next, but I think this has a feel that is focusing on, it does talk about Inland Empire, but it does also focus on David Lynch, the artist, the man, and the individuals. So, and it's so great in that way. So, if you haven't seen Lynch 1, this is your opportunity. It's really cool. It's from 2007. It's approximately 1 hour and 25 minutes. It's great. And speaking of Lynch 2, the next supplement is indeed Lynch 2. This is also from Black and White. This is also from described as being from 2007, approximately 30 minutes. And this is also sort of behind the scenes, again, a portrait of David Lynch, the artist, the individual at work, more perhaps focused on making of Inland Empire. And so it's a nice companion piece to Lynch 1, Lynch 2, this 30-minute work. This had been included on the earlier Absurda DVD as part of that DVD, second DVD supplements disc, which is right here. So for those who know this DVD, you'll know this Lynch 2 30-minute work. I love this. I love when David Lynch, again, please pardon me for my poor David Lynch impression here, when he calls out to some of the crew members like Jeremy. He's like, Jeremy, what are you doing? You know, so that sort of thing. So Jeremy, it's always great to hear David Lynch talk about Jeremy or talk to Jeremy in this, and other people on the crew, of course. And, you know, talks about, you know, are you ready to work Friday night with the monkey? You know, so that type of quote is really great there. And also talking about the importance of a robe, and a blue robe. There has to be a blue robe, and the blue robe needs to be there. We need a blue robe. And so I love that work about the blue robe. So again, it's so much fun. There are some intense moments, very intense moments, David Lynch really getting into the work, almost to the point of being losing patience sometimes, and being very stern and strict. But again, it's not a knock against his character. I think it's in fact showing the intense creativity and the intense creative process, and it's just, I think, making him even more appealing and affable and charming in terms of this great, legendary, iconic figure in the world of cinema. And so you're getting lots of that in this. You're getting a lot of that in Lynch 1, and you get a great dose of that in Lynch 2. So again, for those who know the earlier DVD, you'll know what I'm talking about with Lynch 2. But again, for those who don't, this is your opportunity to watch Lynch 2. This is approximately 30 minutes. Oh, it is great. It's so great. And then that's not all, because what we have next is More Things That Happen. It's this supplement which is referred to as More Things That Happen. It's approximately 1 hour and 14 minutes. And this is also something that we had seen on earlier releases, but it's nice to have it here. And the reason why it's nice is I think it is perhaps safe to describe it as being a type of collection of deleted scenes or alternate takes of things, etc., or extensions of things, much along the lines perhaps of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, The Missing Pieces, in a certain manner of speaking, in the sense that in this world of sort of deleted scenes assembly, it does have a feel of being a type of extension of the world of Inland Empire, or another look from a different point of view of the world of Inland Empire, and different scenarios and different takes on the characters that we had seen in Inland Empire. And say different settings, or the same settings but just in different scenarios or different scene approaches. This is really cool. It's like its own film. It's like its own film. So and it has a type of dream logic. You go from scene to scene to scene. You kind of don't know what's going on, but you do at the same time. You know what I mean? It's almost like watching Inland Empire as well. You kind of know what's going on, but you don't know. It's the same thing when you watch More Things That Happen. You kind of know, but you don't know. It's like its own film. So you're getting More Things That Happen. You had gotten it, of course, on the earlier Absurda DVD, but you're getting it here again. It is so great. And there are some scenes here that, again, I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, but there are some scenes here that are truly, truly Lynchian magical to the max. Truly, truly outstanding stuff. So if you haven't seen this already, please, please, please check out More Things That Happen. This is approximately 1 hour and 14 minutes. And that's not all, because then the supplements on the Criterion disc continue with the short work, which is referred to as Ballerina. It's approximately 12 minutes. This is a work that actually had appeared on the earlier DVD, Absurda DVD. So for those who know that, you will see this again. It's a very fascinating It's a very fascinating work indeed. Let me just end it there. Again, I don't want to spoil the surprise for anyone who hasn't seen it. So, but there's that. And then the Criterion supplements continue with Room to Dream. This is the David Lynch, the audio recording of David Lynch reading from passages of Room to Dream, which is the work that was by David Lynch, also co-authored by Christina McKenna. And here it's a reference to the happiest of happy endings. This is totaling 15 minutes, and you get a picture, and then you have, which is held on screen while you hear the voice of David Lynch reading from this excerpt. And over this course of these 15 minutes, he's talking about so many things. He talks about the beauty of Photoshop. He talks about davidlynch.com. He talks about the standalone scenes. He talks about working, Laura Dern in Poland. And he talks about Eli Roth and the like. So, and many other things, both personal and professional. So these have occurred on many other Criterion releases of David Lynch works. And so it's great to have that continuity here. This is really fantastic. So Room to Dream, the David Lynch reading of excerpts from this work, approximately 15 minutes. Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And then the supplements are rounded out with a trailer, a single trailer with the Janus Films logo. It's a really cool trailer. But that ends the supplements found with the Criterion release. I should say that the Criterion release does have certain bits to it that, say, are new or that have been created, which might not have been found elsewhere. For instance, the Room to Dream audio reading, or the conversation between Laura Dern and Kyle MacLachlan, recorded by the Criterion Collection, which is fantastic, by the way. The other supplements that I discussed here, Lynch 1, Lynch 1 was found on the Japanese double disc release. Lynch 2 and More Things That Happen and Ballerina were found on, say, the Absurda DVD copy, what I have here. There are other supplements, say, on the Absurda release that aren't on the Criterion Blu-ray release, which is what I have here. So, for example, this earlier Absurda release did have a short work called Quinoa. And again, let me do my very poor David Lynch impression here. Quinoa. And so there's that work on the earlier DVD Absurda disc, which is not carried over, unfortunately, onto the Criterion Blu-ray. Another thing that isn't carried over is stories about Inland Empire. And this is on this disc here, we have David Lynch sitting in front of like a red curtain with a microphone talking. It's really cool. Unfortunately, we don't have that carried over onto the Criterion release. So that's a shame, because that conversation with David Lynch is awesome. There are a number of other trailers, and there's a section of still shots, a stills gallery, which is here, which I don't think is carried over onto the Inland Empire Criterion release. There is a trailer for the Inland Empire Criterion release here, but not all the trailers that were found here are carried over into this. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And I should also point out that I don't want to let me say too that there is a DVD set, which is called David Lynch, the Lime Green Set, which is what I have here. And one of the discs is a kind of mystery disc, or a special features disc here, because it's a multi-DVD disc set. And this set includes a section on one of the discs, which is devoted to this series, which is given the title of Rabbits. And the work Rabbits, let me just say that the work Rabbits would have a certain significance when it comes to Inland Empire. Unfortunately, or fortunately, again, depending on your point of view, what we found on the mystery disc of the Lime Green set in terms of the segments of Rabbits, or the episodes of Rabbits, unfortunately were not carried over into the Inland Empire Criterion release. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. But again, is it ultimately important to have that in terms of a kind of a full-bodied appreciation of the work Inland Empire? Again, it's up to you and your subjective experience. From my personal take on it is, I don't think it's necessary to have Rabbits. It's nice to have. It's really interesting to watch, and it's a really fun set of episodes. Rabbits, wow, mind blowing. But But again, it is kind of and kind of not part of the world of Inland Empire. So in that way, it's okay to not have it, I think, on the Criterion release. But it would have been nice to have. Let me put it that way. So in case you're interested, it can be found, for instance, on, say, the lime green set, if you're able to get this. I'm sure it's found elsewhere as well. But that rounds out, I think, the supplements that can be found on the second disc of the Criterion release. So while it's not an assembly of everything that has ever been made with regard to Inland Empire, I think it comes pretty close. It comes pretty close. If you do want to be complete about it, my suggestion is try to track down the earlier DVD, the Absurda DVD, and maybe the lime green set or other resources as well. But you are getting Lynch 1, you are getting Lynch 2 and Ballerina and More Things That Happen. And others, so, and plus some new supplements exclusive, I think, to this Criterion release. In particular, I would highlight the Room to Dream excerpt, and also, well, of course, Room to Dream is available outside of this release in terms of the actual work itself, the writing, of course. But I guess I should also highlight the great conversation between Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern. Wow, 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 wow! It's great. It is great. So. That is my very garbled and all over the place take on the supplements for Inland Empire as found on the Criterion release, but it's fantastic. So please check it out if you can. Jeremy. And so now let us continue our conversation, or begin to round down our conversation, or wind down our conversation, by talking about the packaging, and then also talking about the booklet, which is, again, I've taken out for purposes of this video discussion. First, the packaging. Again, as I referred to, the Criterion Collection has employed this plastic casing, and the plastic casing employs this double disc or dual disc stacking format, which is on this side of the interior of the plastic casing. And then on this side is the compartment that will hold the booklet. And again, I've taken the liberty of pulling it out for purposes of this video discussion. So it is a plastic case, a double disc plastic case that has been used in past Criterion releases. Although, let's point out, of course, that Criterion has released other works by David Lynch on physical media, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, The Elephant Man, and Criterion, Eraserhead. And Criterion has always employed the Digipack format for those releases. So take, for instance, Mulholland Drive, which is what I have here, the recent 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. This was released, like other Criterion Lynch releases, on the Digipack format, which it has this sort of cardboard casing, the Digipack casing, and not the plastic casing. And so it employs this type of wonderful, sort of robust, thick packaging, which can house multiple discs depending on the type of packaging that's used. So this was part of the fun when it came to other David Lynch works as released by Criterion. Noticeably, Criterion does not use the Digipack format for purposes of Inland Empire. And so here we have a David Lynch film released by Criterion, but using the plastic case format. So how does one feel about this? I think there's a couple ways of looking at this. There's potentially a number of ways of looking at this. One way is, of course, looking at it from the point of view of collecting consistency. And, of course, in that way, it would have been nice, I think, to have the Digipack format for Inland Empire's packaging, much like the other Digipack formats that have been used for Criterion releases like Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, etc. So the fact that this is in the plastic case rather than the Digipack format might seem to some to be somewhat disappointing. And if you feel that way, I think that's a very legitimate and a reasonable stance to have. But what I think another way to look at it is that Inland Empire, again, I think, has that place in Lynch's filmography that is very much on purpose. And again, I use this phrase very affectionately and very much with 100% respect. Again, for lack of a better phrase, it has a video, lo-fi, do-it-yourself type of quality to it. And I think it's done on purpose. And again, as Laura Dern mentioned, there's a type of a philosophy of democratization of the process. There's also a real attachment to the beauty of the image, as David Lynch describes it in, say, Lynch 1 and Lynch 2. It's a beautiful image, he says. And so there is a way in which there's a direct immediacy of the video quality that has almost an artificiality to its edges. Also has an echo or hum in terms of the sound quality, and has a type of buzz or electricity. And again, if you recall other works like, say, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, for example, this idea of filtration using the television fuzz and electricity and the jolts and buzz effects. I mean, it has a kind of jagged-like effect on the image itself, and it takes an image that, quote-unquote, might be crystal clear and warps it and muffles it and turns it into something that is both, I think, extremely beyond the sense of reality and then also to the edge of reality, and always stretching the lines of reality versus artificiality in a really brilliant way. And so in that way, that quote-unquote lo-fi or DIY digital video quality, I think, is very much enhanced by, again, borrowing the phrase from Laura Dern, the democratization of the process. And so in that way, Inland Empire stands apart from the other works by David Lynch that rely on film, that rely on, say, that type of quote-unquote image and film image cinematography. And so in that way, it might be said that works like even works like Eraserhead, or works like Blue Velvet, or works like Mulholland Drive, they sort of rely on film. And so it might be said to be that reliance on film might be consistent with then the use of the digipack format in terms of the packaging, whereas Inland Empire has a very noticeable standout quality to it in terms of the use of digital video, DV quality technology. And so in that way, it has a quote-unquote it has that quote-unquote video camera-like quality, which I think maybe is apropos of the use of a different type of packaging, namely the plastic case versus the digipack. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I think it's a kind of cool way of approaching it. In other words, Inland Empire is very much stands apart from the rest of the David Lynch filmography. There are consistent elements to it, as I've tried to suggest, say with Eraserhead, for example. That's definitely the case in terms of the kindred spirit aspect of the content, but in terms of the look and sound, it definitely can be said to be standing apart. And in that way, I think standing apart both visually and sonically is very much mirrored by the way in which the Criterion makes it stand apart in terms of the packaging, plastic case over the digipack. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about this too much, but I think it's really cool. So anyway, that's my 2 cents when it comes to the packaging of Inland Empire. I love it. I think it's really great, and it feels very consistent with the world of Inland Empire in that manner of speaking. Now, going to the booklet. And again, it's a staple booklet, and I love the staple booklet. I love the images. I love the picture quality. Before we get into the contents of the writings, we should say that production credits: art directors Eric Skillman, Sarah Habibi, designer Fred Davis. And I love this too, the design work. This is a type of it feels very much similar to the type of artwork that was used in the sort of promotional materials of Inland Empire, all the way down to the font, all the way down to, oh, it's great. And the tagline, "A Woman in Trouble." I love that. So, and that feel and aesthetic is carried over into the images that are found in the booklet. And this is one of the best booklets. I love this. You look at the pictures, and every picture is a delight. And wow, 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 wow. And I look and I read about the restoration on this page, and on that page you see this great little drawing. Oh, you got to check it out if you have. Oh, this is so cool. I love this. I love this. And another reason why I love this too, that the table of contents shows the casting credits, and then I just read about the restoration, and then worlds within worlds within worlds, Inland Empire on page 6. And this is interview with David Lynch conducted by scholar Richard A. Barney on January 16th, 2008. Excerpted from the 2009 book David Lynch Interviews, edited by Barney. And so you're getting a great interview, really cool interview with David Lynch here, writing here in Inland Empire booklet. So you are getting a lot. You are getting your money's worth when you get Inland Empire, and that money's worth is shown in many aspects of this release. One way is the booklet. So this is great. This is great. This is part of the David Lynch cinema journey that I am on. I've read this through so many times since this arrived in the mail. last month, and I have just been enjoying it. I've seen, and then just reading through this again, reading the diagram. I mean, I mentioned here. Let me just get back here to at the writing. This is a kind of diagram about the transfer process, restoration process. So, very, very cool stuff indeed. And then the interview process and the stills that are included here. Oh, this is one of the best. So, bravo for putting this together. I think it's fantastic. This is going down again as one of my favorites of this year, and maybe of any year perhaps. So Inland Empire, the booklet, well done indeed. I'm very, very happy with, very impressed with it. Okay, so I think I'm at the end of the discussion that I wanted to make about Inland Empire. I'm thinking back to my comments now. I think I was just all over the place. I apologize, but again, I want to just convey just how much I love this work, Inland Empire. I really do. I can't claim to understand everything that's going on with it. Heck no. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in terms of Inland Empire. And every time I think I do, I realize I don't. But that's part of the greatness of this work, Inland Empire. Oh, I love this film so much. I love this film so much. And I apologize for my haphazard approach to talking about this film. And again, I love this film so much. And as the saying goes, strange what love does. So yes, Inland Empire is in the Criterion Collection Physical Media Catalog. This is one of the highlights of the year for me. Not just because of the way that Criterion has treated and handled this great work in a great and respectful way that honors the legacy of Lynch and the craft and care and mystery surrounding this work, Inland Empire, but of course also it brings to the fore, brings into the spotlight, that wonderful digital video, grainy spotlight indeed. It brings into that spotlight this great, towering, important, and mind-boggling WTF work to the max. Inland Empire. Inland Empire is in the Criterion Collection, so if you haven't seen it yet, my dear friends, now is your opportunity. This is Inland Empire. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Inland Empire, including works of David Lynch, including anything and everything that you enjoy, because you deserve it, my dear friends. And so until the next video, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.